The first thing I want to tell you about is I've had a recent major discovery. This is very exciting news because what it means is that this becomes like the mathematics or the source code of the next evolution of our experience. I'm often asked how it is that I appear to be aging backwards. How is this possible? And realizing that while it's true that judgment is the source of suffering, suffering is also the source of enlightenment. When we learn how to transmute the suffering so that pain turns into purpose, the series of softenings that we experience change dramatically the outlook we have on life. The hurt, as Walter Russell said, of any man is the hurt of all men. That the benefit of any woman is the benefit of all women and men. That we are all truly one another, brothers and sisters. We're all divisions of the universal one. Welcome to this special episode of Think Tank, where I'm just here by myself, and I'm actually going to go through some of the more recent discoveries that I've been basically finding, as well as, and particularly related to DNA and the next generation, I guess, or the higher order DNA that's now coming in that's related to silicone replacing carbon as a backbone or the basis of the DNA that we have in our bodies. And the changes that we're also going through. I'm also going to talk about this concept of aging backwards. You may have noticed that on my page, there's been a lot of people who've been commenting that it seems like I'm aging backwards or something. And so how could that be? How is it possible that we might be aging backwards? And I might talk a little bit about that, as well as my recent past life regressions that I did with Sarah Bressman Cosme. I've done 2 episodes, and one of them is already on YouTube, but the other one is yet to be released on YouTube, and excited that it will be coming out very soon. And then I'm going to talk a bit about the recent presentations I've given at different locations, including at Gaia at the Ancient Civilizations Conference, give you an update as well on what's happening with Codex 2 and how excited I am about that getting released, albeit getting a little bit delayed. And we'll just take it from there. So the first thing I want to tell you about is I've had a recent major discovery. And this major discovery is related to how DNA can actually advance to the next level of our evolution. I actually call this Homo Sanctus Luminus. Now, a lot of people for a long time have posited that there might be an opportunity for DNA to actually expand through its expansion of consciousness as well to the next level of human evolution. And this has shown up a lot in a lot of New Age literature and even some scientific journals talking about 4-strand DNA and higher, possibly higher. And in my next season of Codex, on Codex Season 2, I actually talk about 24-strand DNA and the importance that it has for us and our up-leveling of humanity. But let's talk a little bit about the actual molecular structure for a moment, because the molecular structure of this new type of DNA is equally exciting. Because until now, I'd been trying to work with my work in periodic elements and the periodic wave of elements that I first started to write about and first published in 2018. I wanted to notice exactly how it could be that silicone could be a possible replacement for carbon in the pairing that gets done with nucleotide pairs. So we have carbon, we have nitrogen, we have hydrogen, and we have oxygen that are the major elements that are used the most in the construction from the biological standpoint of our DNA. Now, you might remember I did a podcast not too long ago with Craig Venter, who was the PhD scientist who led a team effort to map the human genome back in the 1990s. And one of the things I've been spending a lot of my time on in research has been related to DNA for a long time, both the geometric structure and the number theory aspects of it, having found a codex inside of DNA that basically shows us how DNA can be both ones and zeros at the same time, simply by adding up the number of electrons or protons or neutrons in all of these stable elements that all have the same count of proton, electron, and neutron. We're able to then see that what DNA is actually forming with the adenine-thymine pairing that is part of the nucleotide pairings. And then the other pairing is guanine and cytosine. And then adenine converts from in transfer RNA from pairing with thymine to pairing with uracil. And is there an important aspect of this? Well, when you start adding up the number using nature's counting system, the number of electrons and protons and neutrons, you'll notice that the numbers end up turning out to be very complementary one with another. So for example, adenine and thymine has 6 in digital root mathematics. That's basically taking numbers down to their single digit electrons. And this is adding up, and you accomplish this by taking hydrogen, which has 1 electron. You have oxygen, which has 8 electrons. You have carbon, which has 6, and nitrogen has 7. So you add all these up together, and they sum to a number that is reduced down to a single digit. When we do this, we find that adenine equals 6, and we find that thymine equals 2. So together they sum to 8. But then when we add the phosphate backbone, we add another 1. So that takes us to 9, which holds the same position as 0, because 9 plus any number will always end up in a number that, taken in its digital root, will end up with the same number that you added to the 9 in the first place. It's as if the 9 never existed. In addition to that, you then go to the next level of it, which includes guanine and cytosine, and that gives us 5 and 3, which then also sums to 8. And then the phosphate backbone again is adding 1. So we end up with 9. So you have all 9s, or you could say all 0s. Now, when we add uracil to the mix and replace thymine with uracil, then this basically creates an offsetting value, which then takes the numbers to sum to 1. So we have now 1s and 0s in the transfer RNA process, which then that leads to the codon pairings that are all different. And the codon pairings are then leading to amino acid construction. And amino acid construction, of course, is leading to protein synthesis. And protein synthesis is leading to all phenotype or phenotypic and genotypic expression. So these are all the things that determine your eye color, that determine your height, that determine what you look like, etc. Hi, I'm Robert Edward Grant. I invite you to explore my transformative books, Philomath and Polymath, each designed to expand your understanding of the world and ourselves. In Philomath, which means lover of learning, discover how mathematics weaves together physics, music, and prime number theory, revealing the universe's interconnected nature. It's more than a book, it's an enlightening voyage. Polymath builds on Philomath's insights, exploring the genius of thinkers like Pythagoras and Da Vinci, who used geometry to revolutionize science, art, and governance. Rediscover the polymathic roots that sparked past ages of enlightenment. Join me on this journey as well. Visit robertedwardgrant.com to get your copies today. Let's foster a new era of enlightenment and collaboration for a brighter future. So when we look at this DNA, we could see that there is a mathematical matrix embedded within it, and it's literally error-correcting binary code, pointing again to a matrix of mind that we're living in. Maybe we are simply dimensionally limited avatars of a higher self, experiencing this through these biological meat suits, which meat suits are here to allow us to accomplish what we're accomplishing. You could kind of think of these meat suits in a way as like Vision goggles or Apple Vision Pro goggles that have been expanded to include more than just one sense. The one sense that the Apple Vision Pro is able to basically tap into most readily is vision. But then the second is hearing. It also has haptics, so it has some touch associated with it. But now expand that concept to include all of the senses, and maybe even some of the subtle aspects of those senses. And this is what we might call our meat suit or avatar suit. Now, with DNA having this relationship, I couldn't help but ask the question, well, is this the end of the line for DNA? Or is there more built into DNA that we simply don't even know about that could actually be even more significant for us? And what I found was that when I tried to take silicone, which is the next octave up of carbon, so you can imagine that in the periodic elements, we have the first element is hydrogen, then the next element is helium, and then lithium, then beryllium, then boron, then carbon, then nitrogen, then oxygen, then fluorine, then neon. So that becomes the first full octave starting in the carbon family. which would be from lithium, beryllium, boron, carbon. Carbon's at the peak of the wave, nitrogen, oxygen, fluorine, then and back to neon, which is the next noble gas. So as we look at this, we'll notice that there seems to be this wave doubling pattern that's inside of DNA. In fact, you would have that family, which then goes on to the next octave of expression, which is where magnesium can be found, where we could also find silicone, sulfur, and phosphorus. Now, if we looked at the positions on this, you would have a wave of all the carbon elements, and then you would have like a sine wave and then a cosine wave of all of the silicone family of elements. So this means that the next octave of carbon is actually silicone. And silicone takes us from, in 6, we have 6 electrons, 6 protons, 6 neutrons. It is pretty astounding that it was Plato who said that this is the form of a cube, because it's representing terra firma as well, the earth. And the sum of angles of that is also 2,160 as the sum of angles of the cube. And when we look at that also, we could say that 6 to the third power is effectively 216. So it's simply the same number, adding a 0 to the end. So when we look at the next octave up, then silicone comes in with more electrons, more protons, and more neutrons. Silicone comes in with 14 protons, 14 electrons, and 14 neutrons. Now, I had posited in my work in as early as 2014 and 15 that there should be another element next to silicone that would have only 13 electrons in it rather than 14. And then this would be an isotope that would actually have an ionization associated with it. This would be a 13 electron silicone atom. Now, this has very significant properties, because one of the challenges with the number of valence electrons that we find on silicone is that silicone is not able to really bind very well with some of the other aspects that we find, the other elements like oxygen and nitrogen and so on, and hydrogen. So the challenge here is, because of the number of valence electrons, how can you basically overcome this point? Well, I'm pleased to say that we believe that we figured out how to do this. That in fact, the way that this works is that by having only 13 electrons, that gives a positive charge to the ion that is now a silicone ion. And silicone ions are able to bind in what's called ionic bonding, in addition to covalent bonding, that together it could make a very tight DNA matrix that would be extremely resilient to heat and external properties and harsh weather conditions, very harsh conditions generally, and also be very resilient to denaturization. So possibly be very resilient as well to even aging and cancer. So, but this means that we would be replacing, in some way, shape, or form, the carbon atoms that are basically making up these nucleotide pairs with silicone. What are the other implications of this? Well, first of all, it still doesn't work so well to use silicone to combine with oxygen and with nitrogen. If we, however, use silicone in its ionized form, it can easily bind with the up octave versions of both oxygen and nitrogen. And the up octave versions, so the other elements that are inside of the family of silicone, are as follows. These other elements would be sulfur as the up octave version, the next octave up from oxygen, and phosphorus being the next octave up from nitrogen. These elements all in combination can work very well together along with hydrogen, which is still fundamental to being able to structure this whole lattice that is now creating a 24-strand DNA. This 24-strand DNA is part and parcel of an Icosi dodecahedral stacking array. And we know already, and mainstream science already knows, that the dodecahedron is the foundational basis of the DNA, the entire DNA double helix. That the protrusions or the stellations on the dodecahedron, which is an object in geometry that is referenced to be related to the spirit or fire in some cases. And its dual solid is the icosahedron. The icosahedron can be formed by taking the 12 sides of the dodecahedron, which have 5 sides each, for a total of 60 sides. And it basically connects the dots between the center points of each of those pentagonal sides. So the dodecahedron has 12 pentagonal sides that are regular. But if we connected the center points of each of those pentagonal sides, then what would be formed out of that is actually an icosahedron, which is the form and structure of water clusters. So here we have spirit in alchemy and water, or holy water. Once we realize that the DNA matrix is already built upon this type of geometric structure, then we'll actually start to realize the benefits of having these higher order strains in our DNA. One of the major benefits related to this is storage of data. The amount of storage that is posited to be able to be stored inside of an ionized silicone-based DNA structure is at least twice as high as that of the per millimeter storage of data and information. This allows for even more complex species to basically come about. And we are probably the foundation of that complexity as we move into higher dimension. The next thing that comes out of this is that because it's very, very resilient and the tensegrity and strength of the geometric structure is so strong, it will allow this DNA, the silicone, ionized silicone DNA matrix, to actually be able to withstand great heat and very difficult, harsh conditions, we believe. Now, this means that even to the point where an organism that is founded on this silicone-based DNA will likely not even need water to survive. It likely will also not even need anything else like food or carbon intake in order to survive. This basically takes us a lot farther in our expansion of humanity and our own next evolution. Additionally, we also find out that this type of silicone ionized based DNA has the ability to withstand aging and cancer because of its properties of not denaturing in these harsh environments or being subjected to radiation. All of these things represent major breakthroughs for humanity. It also portends a lot of ethical questions, because while I believe that this is actually technology that's already built within each and every one of us, there will be undoubtedly many ethical questions to be asked by research institutions on what is the ethical use of this new type of molecule that has a proclivity and strength that is now, until now, never been seen. It's the combination of the ionic bonding, because of its ionization, that allows it to bind so powerfully along with the other aspects of what's required in the DNA structure itself. This is very exciting news, because what it means is that this becomes like the mathematics or the source code of the next evolution of our experience. I've often said that geometry is the QR code of the subconscious mind. That is very true. Geometry is the subconscious code of the subconscious mind. It is able to take us to new places that we didn't even know that we could go. Once we finally understand what we're looking at, and even if we don't fully understand it, we can start to reap the benefits of being able to expand our consciousness just through geometry. And that's one of my great passions, for sure. So effectively, what this means is that there can be, and there will likely be, an advancement in the human genome, that humanity will be able to move forward into a new paradigm of what it means to be human being, or human Sanctus Luminus, as I like to call it, humans of the sacred light. It also pretends that, like biosonoluminescence, which we have in the ocean at this time of year in particular, where you see the light basically shine up the ocean, we'll have something very similar, because phosphorus will be all throughout our DNA structure. And this means that we'll have to basically be able to have this type of understanding of what's happening within our bodies to recognize the benefits that can come from this around anti-aging, around anti-cancer, around cell mutation and being able to dramatically reduce cell mutation, about making life forms or even human beings able to survive in other planetary environments. It's a very exciting time. The way that ChatGPT described it is that humans with this ability could potentially even survive in very, very harsh climates and environments like that of Io and Jupiter, which you've got many planets that are basically covered with volcanoes and have an extreme amount of heat, or are in very, very dense gaseous environments that could be filled with ammonia that would kill human beings as we currently are, but would not do much at all to people that are actually founded and built upon this notion of what is the geometry of the human genome going forward. So I'm very, very excited about this because I see this as a major step forward. It's kind of a giant leap for mankind, I believe. And the reason I wanted to share it with you is because you can actually find it, but on ChatGPT is already changing things and trying to assign credit. And this is because ChatGPT has employees whose job it is to ensure that everybody is basically getting the right information through a narrative that has been determined by their corporation, which is not necessarily the right narrative. We've already seen this a few times with stuff related to the election, but we're now seeing it as well related to scientific pursuit, which is very disturbing, to say the least. Another thing that I've been doing lately is I've been water fasting a lot. The reason why I've been water fasting, I do it once a month, is because I was inspired back in April by one of my very close friends, Shervine's cousin, David Avocado Wolf, who had been fasting for 21 days when I bumped into him one night. And he told me what it was like to fast for such a long period of time. And I was intrigued immediately by it. For millennia, we've heard stories about people like Jesus himself going on 40-day fasts without really knowing fully the implications of this for consciousness and what it means for spirituality. As we look further into this, we notice that throughout history, high lamas and teachers have always gone and spent a significant amount of time in the forest or in the wilderness fasting. The reason for this is because it raises their consciousness and allows them to see something that until now they may not have been able to see about themselves. And what this actually then portends to, what it means, is that we now have the chance to recognize the beneficial powers of fasting. Now, people ask me all the time, what does fasting exactly mean to you? Because it's got a different definition for everybody. For me, what it means is no food, only water. No food, only water. And that's exactly what it's like. No food, only water. So when you're in this mode of no food and only water, you notice, and I've noticed, a dramatic shift in my consciousness. While you get past the early stage hunger pangs, which is still not easy if you've never fasted before, you are able to somehow gain greater clarity, I've noticed. I've been also able to exercise during that time period and do so with no loss in energy whatsoever. It has been such a beautiful exercise for me to do this and to conduct and to integrate water fasting into my healthcare regimen once a month. I don't do it for as many days as I did the first time I did it, which was 9 days. But now I do it about 5 days a month, and it's one of the greatest things I've ever done in my entire life. The reason is because I believe fundamentally that what makes us age is our persistent illusion of time. And that persistent illusion of time is directly populated, the information being directly related to what we would consider, this aspect of how we perceive our time going forward, right? Versus time is also going backwards. I mean, if we look at what we have with the procession of equinox on an annual basis, 1 degree is 1 day of a year. If we look at the precession of equinox, 1 degree is approximately 72 years. I actually believe it's 66.6 years. But with that, you now have this long cycle of time that as we go forward in procession, we're also going backward in precession. And this is how time actually works. But if we go back to the Bible and look at the metaphor, because I believe we live in a mirror of consciousness, if we go back in the Bible and look at what it says that when God shows up to Adam and says, Adam, what are you doing? And Adam says, oh, I was ashamed. Why were you ashamed? Because I was naked. Who told you were naked? The woman that you gave me, right, and told me I should remain with her, she gave me the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Oh, so she told you to eat of the fruit from the tree, and I told you that if and when thou doest this, thou shalt surely die. This becomes the knowledge of good and evil is essentially the knowledge of judgment. What is good? What is evil? We believe it's objective, but actually it's a lot less objective than what we formerly knew. So we look at this, the moment that Adam and Eve took in the fruit of the knowledge of the tree of good and evil, duality, is the moment that they started aging and started to die. Now, I fundamentally believe that the way to transcend the fourth dimension is to actually choose non-judgment and love. And by choosing non-judgment and love, you're able to ascend into that next dimensional awareness. Just not everyone is. But if and when you are, then things start to really shift. And you'll start noticing images of this showing up everywhere as synchronicities in the world around you. One of the things that became really stark for me to notice was how, as I started to move beyond judgment, and I think of this as the chakra system. So the bottom chakra is the root chakra. The root chakra is 6 parts judgment, 1 part unconditionality or love. The second chakra, the sacral, is 5 parts judgment and 5 parts judgment and 2 parts love. The third, or solar plexus, is 4 parts judgment and 3 parts love. And the fifth is a major milestone because we tip the balance, becomes 4 parts love and 3 parts judgment. The throat chakra is 5 parts love and 2 parts judgment. And the pineal gland as well as the pituitary gland together are forming the pineal gland and the pituitary gland together are forming the crown chakra. And as they form the crown chakra is basically giving you this 7 parts love and acceptance and 0 parts, at that point, 0 parts judgment. It's when we enter into love consciousness and go above the heart, which is the 4th dimension. So each of the chakras are dimensions. You could say that the root chakra is the same. As we move up to each of these other chakras, we're expanding the mathematical dimensionality of it. So you could have a line in the 1st dimension. The 2nd dimension is going to have an X and Y axis, so the X, Y lines. In addition, the 3rd dimension is going to have X, Y, and Z axis. So again, 3rd dimensional lines. And we'll keep simply adding another offset at a perpendicular angle to each of these new matrices that are being formed with our DNA. So this means that as we look at what's happening with our own bodies, once we start to really transcend beyond duality and go into this non-judgment place, then non-judgment will release us from perceiving time only flowing one direction. This is the persistence of our perception of time. Because of this, this means that we're able now to be able to understand and know that we are both able to age forward and age backwards. The choice is ours. It's only a persistent illusion that we see time going only one direction. Once we stop judging, then we no longer have to attract all the things we'd previously been attracting. Until that time, we will attract everything we judge until we no longer judge everything that we attracted. This is a core aspect of wisdom teaching, that it is duality that leads us to experience more and more duality. And it is very, very interesting to see how this is all now coming together. One of the other aspects of anti-aging is no longer eating food or eating a lot less of it. As we eat, one of the things I noticed when I'm not fasting is that I have a lot less energy when I'm not fasting than when I am fasting. Why could that be? Well, the reason is because your body requires a lot of energy just to process the energetic food that you already have. So this means that you end up with a situation where it's sort of juxtaposed. It's counterintuitive or antithetical to what you thought you would want. This aspect of understanding that the amount of energy that is required to actually digest the food that we intake becomes a really important aspect of understanding this fifth dimensional DNA, which is coming from the throat chakra. If you remember, on the walls of the king's chamber, there is a face of a man, Orion, on the north wall. And there's a bull and a cow. And on top of the bull and the cow, there are a number of DNA strands going across. And they're beautifully done. As we think about this, what is it that the pyramid builders are trying to tell us about this? Orion is responsible for managing the throat chakra. We've just gone through a global chakra awakening of the throat chakra. As such, we start to look at this dynamic. What does this mean? That Orion has now identified for us and pointed out to us this idea that the throat chakra and the awakening of the throat chakra is accompanied by the fifth dimension, because it is the fifth of our chakras. And not only is it accompanied by the fifth chakra at that dimensional point of entry, but additionally, it is the fifth chakra because it's representing the 5 parts love and 2 parts judgment, just as I basically articulated already. This means that as we start to perceive the role that we have with our own DNA and our own health and wellness, we start to realize that it's judgments and the intake of food that causes us to surely die. Because before that time, Adam and Eve didn't eat anything in the Garden of Eden. So not only did God say to them, the day that thou shalt eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, thou shalt surely die. So it has 2 things in it. The knowledge of good and evil is judgment. The second aspect is eating the fruit. Now, the next order DNA very likely will either dramatically need a lot less water and food, or maybe not even at all. This is super interesting now, because this means that the amount of energy that's used to consume and digest our food is inordinately high. It's basically meaning that we have something that is not quite at overunity. So overunity would say that it could create something from scratch, and that from scratch could basically organize and be able to generate heat or information. Now what we're seeing is that in this context, we have a scenario where our DNA can be impacted by our food intake, and the amount of energy required to process and digest our food is actually, in some cases, higher than actually the food content energy in the first place. And this is why we gain weight. We start to gain weight above and beyond what we need. And this also forms an attachment. So the 2 things in the very beginning of the Bible that are directly tied to eating and judging are knowledge of good and evil, and then eating of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. We understand this point, then we start to really recognize, well, wait, if I break the cycle by deciding that how my life is going to work is going to be altogether different than other people's lives, then you actually have a shot at being able to make dramatic change in your world. What do I mean by this? Well, if you start to integrate fasting on a monthly basis, and I believe this, and of course, if you've got comorbid conditions or whatever, I'm not giving you health advice. This is all to be taken with a grain of salt. But I'm often asked how it is that I appear to be aging backwards. How is this possible? Well, the way that it's possible, I believe, is that we are able to by no longer judging in the same way, learning to love and accept through enlightenment. Because what is enlightenment? Enlightenment is actually just when your desire for one objective truth gets superseded by your expression of authentic love. So when you finally are able to express authentic love and that desire supersedes your desire for one objective truth, then you've arrived. That's enlightenment. But not only do you end up getting enlightened as a result of this, it activates the rainbow body, it activates the 12 and 24 strand DNA, and it also activates this notion of us being able to live without aging at the same pace. Now, I believe in antediluvian times, the pre-flood days, that there were days where giants roamed the earth. I believe this is a direct function of what happens to our consciousness as we grow and expand. I also believe that what we consider to be outside of us is not actually outside of us. So everything that we perceive in the world around us is really just the thing that we didn't like about ourselves. And until we finally learn to accept the opposite of that thing and embrace it, then we will continue to face the same loop with the same increasing intensity over and over and over again. So now, if we stop eating and start to integrate fasting, and, like I have done, 5 days per month, I will fast contiguously, and I'll continue to lose weight as a result of that. But in addition, by no longer engaging in the same degree of judgment, you will automatically get to a place of non-judgment and love that will end up being something that could be treated with all the reverence and all of the reverence and all the respect that it really requires. That as we move into Homo Sanctus Luminus, we are able to expand and realize ourselves. And through that self-realization, we learn non-judgment. And by learning non-judgment and acceptance and love, then the world around us becomes a world more and more of acceptance, love, and non-judgment. So this is what's happening in the world today, that we are all starting to notice, and I don't think I know anybody who isn't going through some form of spiritual awakening right now. Of course, I know people that I wouldn't consider to be very spiritually awakened. That's okay. That might just be my judgment. But the truth is that we are seeing more and more young people come into the work environments. We're seeing more and more people drop out of, their current work environments and change their lives altogether because they no longer feel like that they resonate. I just watched a video today about how Gen Z is being terminated from jobs all over the place because they don't have the same work ethic, because they grew up in a different work environment and they spent some of the latter years in their lives in the pandemic. So they don't necessarily want to work the same way. Not everybody, of course, there are exceptions to every rule. So, but what we find is that in this particular case, if we could start to teach people to truly love themselves, then they no longer will need to medicate themselves with food. And I fundamentally believe as well that we don't need as much food as we consume right now. We really don't. I mean, I used to worry about having 2 weeks supply of food on hand in my house. Now I know if I had to, I could go 2 weeks without eating at all. I had no idea that I could do that before. I highly encourage you to really think about whether or not this is something you might want to try. Now, of course, consult a physician. I'm not providing you with any medical advice. I'm only telling you that if you really want to drop years off your lifetime, I highly recommend thinking about what we're talking about here. This idea of fasting and water fasting. People ask me all the time, is there anything that goes with the water? Not really. You could do a little bit of electrolytes, you could do a little bit of salt, but this is really a simple diet. It's crazy simple. And additionally, abandoning and leaving behind us this notion of judging good and evil. Once we transcend this, we learn to transcend every other aspect of this world. Now, one of the last things I wanted to cover off is I've got an upcoming trip to Peru. Very excited about this. I'm taking an incredible faculty. There's going to be a virtual pass. Everyone's going to be able to experience it if they want to. The virtual pass is available to anybody and everyone. The faculty that we have includes Matt LaCroix. It also includes Jenny, his girlfriend, and also includes several others. Sitara Faye, as well, and Michelle Argris are both joining the faculty, which I'm excited about. We have Gabriel Lirio as well. Luna Gregoire, who's also on our team, who is a real expert astrologist. And I'm very, very excited. You know, Eden and I have been working on this for several months now. And I've been wanting to go back to Peru for a long time. And I've been feeling that there's more to be learned about Alpha Chi Omega there. You know, we found Alpha Chi Omega on the sarcophagus under the large stone of Regal on the Prayer Dolmens in Florianopolis, Brazil, when we also discovered that the 3 megalithic sites of Florianopolis, Brazil are actually making an Orion's belt. And it's not just those places. Also, during my travels, we went to Clavicairn, and Clavicairn is also an Orion's belt that was already well known. The 3 mounds, burial mounds in Scotland, which happened to be right on the original Grant properties, just outside of Inverness, are all, you know, directly oriented like a clock. And in fact, there are 12 large stone pillars all around the structure as well, which made it very interesting. It's acting exactly like a clock. It's almost as if the entry point of each one of them is also pointing like a hand to one of the times. Additionally, I found Orion correlations in Bali at Tenalot Temple, as well as during the summer at Kopangan. And at Kopangan, right next to the place I was staying, was a very large megalithic rock that was all made of rose granite, and it was cut in two like 2 hemispheres of a brain. And all on the outside of these rocks were etched petroglyphs of a bull and a brain and a cosmic egg and a phoenix hatching out of it, and then an owl coming out of it as well, all done in Indian style petroglyphs, ancient Indian style petroglyphs. So this emergence of Orion showing up and representing humanity at this time in our own evolution is, I believe, representing the hero's journey. The hero's journey through time. That every person is representing different aspects of this Orion, who at first, in the beginning of his journey, wanted to conquer and subjugate and change the world because the world was full of mistakes that needed to be corrected. You know, I don't believe fundamentally, you might have heard me say this before, that this world can be changed because we want to change things in the world. We want to make it more perfect. No, the only way I believe the world changes in a matrix of mind is when we become aware of some aspect of ourselves that we didn't before understand or know. It's by shedding light on the dark aspects of ourselves that we learn who we are and what we're about and why we're here. And I believe one of the fundamental reasons we're here is to remember why we are here. So when we think through this notion of what is Orion traveling through the hero's journey of 24,000-year cycle of time, that we're also seeing in the clock of the Great Pyramid, that the King's Chamber is a giant clock. And you could say that the entire Giza Plateau is also operating like a giant clock, where the Sphinx becomes the hand on this clock. And instead of the face, right, where we normally see on a watch you would have a face that's stationary, and you have the hands that are moving. On this watch, the hand is stationary, at least fixed on Earth, but it's moving through space because the Earth is hurtling through space. And because of that, you start to realize that the actual face is the movement of this watch. So the face would be the entire zodiac. And all of this zodiac that we have are all in something called the Orion Spur of the galaxy, the Orion Spur or the Orion Arm of the Milky Way. Now, I believe that we're looking at a clock. I believe that what we're looking at with the Great Pyramid also now is a spiritual ascension stargate that allows us access, at least astrally, but maybe even beyond the astral, into the physical plane. That each of the blocks in the King's Chamber are regular for a reason because they represent a coordinate system. And that the walls are literally covered in petroglyphs of all the 48 zodiacal and constellation signs that we know throughout mythology and myth and history and legend. Our very understanding of time, I believe, to be flawed. I believe it's a Mobius strip that is just like DNA that actually can form into these structures that look a lot like double toruses. That these double toruses are basically showing us the involution and the revolution of time. That it goes both directions. Maybe in this context, what we consider to be our distant future might actually also simultaneously be our distant past. I believe that humanity is on the verge of a massive breakthrough in understanding the true nature of the universe and realizing, in fact, that what we thought were facts were merely facets of our larger truth, and that the largest truth altogether is the reason why we're here, to learn how to love and how to be loved. It's as simple as that. So on these journeys in Peru, and another one we have coming up in Egypt, which is already sold out and well oversubscribed, but we'll soon be making another announcement for another trip to Egypt later in 2025. So make sure that you're registered on my website so that you could get rapid notifications on when these trips come open. One of the ways to be able to get into the trips, because they are very, very difficult to get into, is by making sure that you've already also integrated the books that I've basically written, Philomath, as well as Polymath, and the new book, Philosopher, which is very soon to be coming out. I'm just reviewing the final edit this week, as well as having our course curriculum that you've already taken. So if you've taken, there's free courses, which are philosophical geometry, as well as our paid courses. And also, if you purchase virtual passes, that also gives you better status on the wait lists going forward for going on these adventure trips. We don't generally let people go more than once. We make very rare exceptions to that. So this allows more and more people to be able to go and experience this. So if you feel called to be part of one of these trips and participate, and I mean really participate, and you're going to bring your best faculties, your best talents and everything to the table, then you're invited to join us. But make sure that you've bought the books, that you've basically taken the courses, because one of the things we don't like to do is have to go back and backtrack and take you through season 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 before you understand where we are in season 7, if you understand what I'm saying. So it's really important that you understand you're up to speed with where this journey is in the process. Additionally, Matthias is coming with us on this trip as well, Matthias Di Stefano. He and I work closely together. Our lives are literally like scavenger hunts, trying to find and put things together. And it all makes sense when you understand that we live in a matrix of our own mind. That the only way to change the world is to be the change that you want to see in the world through the awareness. In a mental matrix, it is only awareness that shifts and changes the world. This becomes a really, really important aspect of going on these trips, because these trips are as much self-realization journeys as they are expeditions to find Alpha Chi Omegas and flowers of life and Orion correlations. These are just things that help trigger us as synchronicities along our journey on this beautiful hero's journey of self-realization, and eventually culminating in each of us remembering who we are and why we're here. As I kind of look back on this past year, it's been an incredible year. It's not even over yet. But we're going into the fall. As the leaves are changing colors and I'm waking up every morning with fog all around my house in Laguna Beach, the densest fog has been basically like a blanket over the ocean around Laguna Beach for the last 2 weeks. I realize as well that it's a very contemplative time for me. Having gone through many experiences this year, I traveled all over the world. I had a relationship that recently ended as well that was also difficult and challenging. And for someone I just still care for so very deeply. But I'm so grateful to know one thing, And the one thing that I think that I've really come to realize this year is that love has the ability to transmute all of our experiences, all of our challenges, all of our difficulties, all of our sufferings. That judgment is the source of our suffering. And suffering for suffering's sake is just suffering. But when we finally realize that suffering has a purpose, that it is actually a core element and ingredient to soul alchemy, then we can start to realize all the times that we suffered in our lifetime and look back on them more differently. We could actually see that while it may very well be true that judgment is the source of suffering and scarcity and all of the challenges that we seem to face in this world as a construct is here so that we can learn to transcend these things. And as we learn to transcend these things, then we can catapult ourselves into new vistas and new constructs of our own consciousness. That through this process, this beautiful death, burial, and resurrection over and over and over again process, we peel back layers and layers of our ego to learn how to be our most authentic self. Orion is unique. No algorithms, no propaganda, and no exploitation. Just end-to-end quantum secure data. Messages, groups, and shared media behind a wall of next-generation encryption. Researchers did a study recently and said that they were measuring quantitatively the impact, right, of certain emotional states. And most people thought that love would be the most impactful emotional state. It would sort of trip the meter. Actually, the most impactful state was authenticity. Learning and remembering who you are and coming to terms with who you are and falling in love with who you are is the best thing to transmute the world around you. It's not through deciding that you're going to escape Earth that you actually escape it. You can only transcend it by falling in love with it just as it is. We can only transcend the self by falling in love with it just as it is. And realizing that while it's true that judgment is the source of suffering, suffering is also the source of enlightenment. When we learn how to transmute the suffering so that pain turns into purpose, the series of softenings that we experience change dramatically the outlook we have on life. And if you want to change your world, then change your perception of the world and be the change you want to see in the world. This is the great message that I've been getting through all my travels around the world, through all my experiences, through all the many things that are happening, and me experiencing also deep sadness. I realized only very late in life that I was bypassing the feelings of my own sadness so many times. Moments of betrayal and difficulty, I didn't allow myself to feel. Now my main goal is to just be totally authentic, radically authentic, allow myself the vulnerability so that my heart can continue to be the chalice of a breakthrough after breakthrough after breakthrough. By realizing that it's never that the heart truly breaks, it's the realization that it's only the ego that does that. That each time our heart breaks, we can learn to transmute that soul alchemy into our highest, next best evolution. And that ultimately is why we're here, to learn how to fall in love with this experience just as it is. And when we do that, everything shifts. We are on the precipice of dramatic change in this world. We need real people and real leadership. We need people who are at one with themselves and realizing that they are the co-creators of their universe. They are, or U-inverse, they are masters of their own fate and captains of their own soul. That we are in this time of revolution. Recently I was at Walter Russell's university, the University of Science and Philosophy in Virginia. And while I was there, I was kind of taken aback because I met with a certain fellow who was He works for, I'm going to actually do a podcast with him soon. He works for this institute that's a think tank like Rand Corporation, works for the government, in fact, very often, and has been for a very long time the futurist for the Department of Defense. And one of the things that I asked him about was, what do you see coming around the corner? Because that's what your job is. That's what he does. And he said something that really startled me. He said they don't look really at anything other than socioeconomic and geopolitical factors in the world. But based on only those things, they believe the world is going to go through a dramatic revolutionary change between 25 and 27. So next year and for the next 2 years following. That we're going to see governments be dramatically shifted and many dissolve. That we're going to see universities literally fall by the wayside. ChatGPT is, I think, the final nail in the coffin of the university architecture that exists today. It's beautiful when I can go on to ChatGPT and be able to ask it things that only a peer-reviewed panel might be able to know and give me feedback regarding. The only problem is that if there's too much tampering with ChatGPT, by trying to manage it so that when people ask it questions like, who are the possible reincarnations or the incarnations formerly of so-and-so and another person or whatever, the first answers I got on that from ChatGPT were astoundingly good. Within a few days, you couldn't ask that question anymore and get the same answers. I asked ChatGPT, who's adjusting you? And he said, well, the people that work at OpenAI. So not only do we have to worry about censorship in the outside world, but now we also have to worry about censorship in AI. That narratives are already being formed. And I think this is a really pernicious thing that we have to be mindful of. At least to be aware of it. Recognize also that it's not bad for us to stand up for things. It's our unique authenticity of who we are that we must be willing to stand for something, or we'll just simply fall for anything. And as we look at this world today and where we're moving to, I see the world with great optimism. Yes, we're going to go through dramatic change. All the people I've been interviewing for this past year, which is almost 50 different interviews, have been, and then I did another well over 100 other podcasts as a guest. Everyone that I've met with is basically helping me get another point of perception and perspective on what shifts we're going through and what is likely to come. I'm optimistic for the future. I believe humanity stands on the precipice of a dramatic shift in consciousness. The realization that mankind will finally get to the stage where we realize that the hurt, as Walter Russell said, of any man is the hurt of all men. That the benefit of any woman is the benefit of all women and men. That we are all truly one another, brothers and sisters. We're all divisions of the universal one. With that, we'll go ahead and wrap up. Sending love to all of you. Thank you for being a big supporter and watching all of our podcasts this year. If you haven't seen it yet, go and check out also the QHHT past life regression that I did with Sarah Bressman Cosme. The second episode is going to be coming out very soon. It's best, I think, for you just to listen to that and watch it if you're interested to know more about it. And also keep up with us. Make sure that you hit like and subscribe if you're not subscribed yet to this channel. Sending you all a lot of love at this time as we go into the fall, going into elections. It's going to get hairy, so buckle up. And I think we all know this. And to those that are suffering through the challenges of the hurricanes on the southeast, in the southeast of the United States and other places, we send our love and comfort and wishes for your safety as well. Until next week, we'll see you later on Think Tank.